Hello, everybody. This is Claudia with the Spiritual Wisdom series to promote and educate the community on the importance of spirituality and yoga psychology and modern psychology for mental health. So I have a super special guest today. Her name is Brahmaprana, Pravrajika Brahmaprana. We call her Mataji, and she is a sannyasi from the Ramakrishna order. And I want to introduce you to her, and we're going to talk about specifically the importance of spirituality and what is yoga psychology and how can help people maintaining good health, mental health, and even physical health, because the mind-body connection. So, hello, Mataji. How are you?
Welcome, Claudia. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. I know you're so busy, so it's an honor for me to do this interview. So I go to the Vedanta Center in Irving, where Mataji is the spiritual leader there in the center, and she does lectures and classes, and she runs the center, and it's wonderful. So why don't you tell us, Mataji, a little more about your background? What is the Ramakrishna order, and how did you fall into that area in your life?
Fall in is a very good expression. Well, I was raised Christian, but my parents left when I was 12 years old, and by the time I was in college, I was agnostic. But what changed my life was my father's passing when I was a freshman in college, and that's when I started asking the big questions. What is the meaning of life? Is this all there is? And at that time, comparative religions had just entered the school curricula. And we were reading Houston Smith's famous book, The Religions of Man, which is now the World Religions. And my professor said we were going to the Vedanta temple, the spiritual grandson of Ramakrishna. And Ramakrishna is this wonderful mystic behind. But of all the chapters in the book, I found Hinduism to be my least favorite. I was more drawn to Buddhism. But when I went to the temple and walked in, my future teacher was giving a Bhagavad Gita class. And I cannot remember anything he said, but I knew upon seeing him that he was a man of God. And that changed my life. And after that, I drove up to Santa Barbara. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and drove up to Santa Barbara to have an interview with him. And within about a year, I had moved into the convent there, 1971. So this religion and philosophy is something that is not a creed. It is something that allows to question. In fact, it's important to be able to question because that grounds your faith into a conviction, and not just a faith, sort of a nebulous understanding of what your belief is, but a conviction. And also the breadth of this tradition. You can be a dualist, a qualified non-dualist, a non-dualist. In fact, you can be a Christian and a Vedantist because the yoga practices are open to all. And the philosophy of Vedanta, which is the non-dual tradition, is the backbone of our tradition, because even as dualists, when we worship, we are worshiping a symbol that represents the impersonal reality. So that appealed to me greatly, and the fact that it's very science-based and time-tested.
Yes, that's what it appealed to me too, that you can ask questions. I remember growing up Catholic, and I had tons of questions, and I was always shut down, because the nuns in my school, they thought I was threatening them, but I was coming from a curiosity, philosophical mind. And yeah, they didn't get me very well. Some of them,
Well, actually, the school of Maya is a school of logic. And so the path of non-dual Vedanta is based on self-inquiry. And the whole Upanishadic tradition of the Vedas, which is the revelation portion of the Vedas, these Upanishads grew out of the right question being asked the spiritual teacher. And so a qualified student comes with a certain knowledge and a mental qualification and spiritual yearning to be able to voice the right question, the deep question that brings forth the knowledge of God.
Yeah, thank you, Mataji. And can you tell us a little more about the other person next to Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, how important he is in the Vedanta philosophy? He was the first monk from India to come to the America, right? And I think it was the 1800s?
1893.
1893.
At the first World of Religions in Chicago. And the Parliament was designed to prove the superiority of the Christian tradition. But what happened when he was chosen to come, he captivated the audience. He was the last speaker to speak. And when he opened his mouth, he said, "Sisters and brothers of America," and 7,000 people just rose to their feet. And it was a thunderous applause that lasted minutes. And what he had to say was, is really considered, he is considered the pioneer of interfaith dialogue, because he said, "Do I wish to make a Hindu a Christian or a Christian a Hindu? God forbid. But each must learn from the other tradition and grow according to their own law of growth." So the breadth and the depth of this philosophy was absolutely mesmerizing to Americans. And he established the first Vedanta centers in America and was asked to lecture throughout the country. He was in this country for about 3 years during his first visit. And then he went back and established the Ramakrishna mission, which is the humanitarian mission of the Ramakrishna order.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm a big fan of Swami Vivekananda.
He actually wrote the 4 yogas, which are the 4 pillars of our tradition. That includes Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. Then there's Karma Yoga, the path of action. There's Raja Yoga, which is the yoga psychology based on the Yoga Sutras. And then there's Jnana Yoga, the non-dual tradition. So all of these together forms a very broad-based tradition. And each of us may prefer one yoga over, but we incorporate all of them into our lives.
Yeah, that's what I try to explain to the community, that yoga is not only exercise. In the United States, when we hear yoga, people think it's just the exercise. And it's not that. That's just a very small portion of what yoga is. And
the Hatha Yoga is important, because the whole idea of meditation is that your body should be healthy enough that you can forget the body in meditation. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, Hatha Yoga is like a warm-up or an introduction to make the body strong for meditation. Is that correct?
In our tradition, yes, but also many of our monastics perform Hatha Yoga to keep the body strong. And also, I think there's a great deal of benefit in Hatha Yoga because there's a learning of the mind-body connection. And there's a beginning awareness of the importance of the connection and how to deal with the mind through the body. So I think that's beneficial. And then also how to behave, to change your behaviors through your mind. Because Hatha Yoga involves a lot of the mind as well.
Exactly. That's behavior modification in American terms, and that can be achieved through yoga. It's a personal growth tool, scientifically driven.
It is. It is, Claudia. And in fact, some swamis have advanced it even further. We had a yoga psychology workshop here. We also had a yoga workshop where this swami from the French Center of Gretz came, and he had invited me to the International Yoga Day in France, where I was astonished to see these 40 different yoga practitioners, each being given an aspect of Yoga Vedanta, for example, Sat, the courage to be, or Ananda, love incarnate, or Chit, being and becoming, and asked to formulate their yoga sessions around those spiritual maxims. And then a questionnaire was handed out, and this was all part of a UNESCO initiative. And at the end, the surveys were encapsulated. It was quite impressive. And so I brought that here to Dallas for our devotees.
Yeah, we're so lucky. All right.
Well, it was a very inspiring session.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I would like to know, what is your opinion, Mataji, on spirituality? What is spirituality to you? A lot of people, when they hear spirituality, they immediately think religion. And sometimes people have been so disappointed in their churches or religion for whatever reason. We won't go into that too much, but spirituality is universal for me. You don't have to believe in anything specifically. What is your opinion? What is spirituality? And how can spirituality help in mental health?
Good question. Well, the original meaning of religion was religare, to reunite. And the meaning of yoga is a Sanskrit ancestor of the English word yoke, which means to rebind through nature. It's also the method, and it's also the realization. So spirituality, so religion has received a bad connotation. It's become a very structured, creed-based, dogma-based definition to a lot of people. I would say that spirituality is more than mere belief. To say I believe in God, anyone can say that, but does it transform you? But when you combine that belief with spiritual practice, that's when transformation takes place. Spiritual practice is the backbone of spirituality. And that the purpose is to realize God and to become what we call self-realized in the sense of the capital S, our supreme self, which is divine, which we call the. It could be Christ consciousness, it could be Buddha nature, it could be Krishna consciousness, it could be the consciousness of the Divine Mother, or it can be the non-dual consciousness. Ultimately, the highest level of realization is the non-dual. So the difference between religion and spirituality depends on what definition you are giving to it. And I think we had a great church exodus in the 1960s and 70s, where there was an allergy to religion because it had become corrupted, and a natural distrust for authoritarian types of organizations. So East, the paradigm is different. We have 6 systems of philosophy, and they represent 6 progressive developments of truth. And for our particular tradition, Sankhya and Vedanta are closely linked. It goes back thousands of years. And out of Sankhya came the Vedanta philosophy, and also the yoga system, which came a little later, but there were certainly threads running throughout the Indian subcontinent. What is so interesting in our tradition is that it's not your tradition versus my tradition. The traditions in India are built through osmosis, one on top of the other. They each stand on the shoulders of the other and take threads from applicable threads from each of these traditions to apply. So the Advaita Vedanta tradition is based on the traditions of the Vedas, thousands of years old, way back before the written tradition, where the Vedas were memorized literally backwards and forwards, so no syllable could be lost. and then carried down, and it changed. And it continues to change. Shankara systematized it in the 8th century, but Sri Ramakrishna again revitalized it, added to the Shankara tradition the whole aspect of karma yoga, serving God and humankind. So it's a osmosis, a development of thought, spiritual thought, and practice. Yeah, of our tradition.
The practice of the traditions of yoga, mindfulness, all of that. Yeah, we can talk about that for hours. It's a huge topic. So Mataji, so you are often asked to speak on mental health and psychology, and you are also a scholar. I know you have.
That's very generous.
I think you are.
I consider myself a learner, perpetual.
Yeah, we never stop learning. But you have translated several scriptures, right, or parts of it from
I've
Hindu.
edited and compiled, and yes, worked on translations. Yes.
Yes. So yeah, you know your stuff. You are very, very knowledgeable and experienced. So when you are asked to speak about psychology and mental health from the point of view of a Sannyasini or sannyasi, how do you approach your lectures to people to really help them see that the spiritual aspect of our lives can really help you get out of mental funk? For example, in my coaching practice and being a student of mental health, I am now doing an internship, so I'm seeing clients, and a lot of them have a lot of anxiety and depression. So teens, adults, a lot of anxiety, and we apply cognitive therapies, which is helping them see things from another perspective. But I always feel my style is to explore what is their spiritual beliefs, what is their spiritual views, because I think that is the rock that grounds people. So if you don't believe that there is somebody watching for you, that you are a perfect human being in your soul and your spirit, all of that is part of the spirituality and Vedanta traditions, right? How can people get better? Because cognitive therapy is logic. But aside from the logic, I think we also need that spiritual side to anchor people, right? So I hope that's clear. When you are asked to talk, do you approach it from that perspective, that the importance of mental health, of spirituality for mental health?
Well, I approach it from the standpoint of the mind. That is the great contribution of Buddhism and Vedanta and yoga, is an understanding of the mind. We have to know who we are and what we are not. And so this understanding of the mind is based on self-inquiry. When we stop to think about what is the mind, many people will point to the brain. Well, in fact, we know that there are correlates between consciousness and the brain, but we don't know what those correlates are. Science doesn't know. And if we were to try to picture where the body is, would we see the body in the mind, or would we see the mind in the body? Where do we see our body? We see the body in the mind. The mind is not in here. It's a vast lake. The mind travels far. And in that mind, they're not just thoughts. There are all kinds of things. There are thoughts, there are emotions, there are memories. And these are what cloud the mind and raise waves in the mind that we call vritti, whirlpools in the mind. So if if I were to have a psychology session with someone, I would give them a mindfulness meditation, first of all, to ask them to view the mind as a lake and watch your thoughts without judgment, See how they come and they go. See how they grip you. But maintain the attitude of witness to the mind. It's very important. And with that practice, the patient gets an experiential knowledge that the mind is in two parts. There's a lower mind and a higher mind that is watching the mind. And that higher mind in psychology is called the buddhi. That's the part of the mind that is actually in the heart. And it also points to that supreme self. So if we're able to watch the mind and see and perceive the thoughts and emotions, we understand right then and there that the mind is subtle matter, because science tells us that anything we can observe is material. So I think all of us would say, well, no, I'm not a material being. I'm something more than that. And so the first thing is to understand that we have a mind, but we are not the mind. And that is a Christian concept because the soul is connected with the mind. Whereas in Vedanta, the soul is pure consciousness. It's not this monkey mind that's running around, agitated, sometimes dull. So that is the most important premise, is to understand you have thoughts of anxiety, but you are not anxious. You have anxiety, but you are not anxious. You are not happy. You feel happiness, but you are not happy. You are the supreme self. You are the onlooker. So that is the first important premise, I would say, is to help the patient understand the mind is a monkey. In the Buddhist and Hindu tradition, has been called a monkey mind, not just a monkey, but a drunken monkey. And a drunken monkey that's stung by a bee. It is erratic, it's not logical, and there are no such things as thoughts here and emotions there. It's a combination of thought clusters that we have habituated in our thought process, and then to try to break that pattern by injecting new, healthier thought processes into our mind through meditation, through aphorisms, through, for example, one beautiful practice is memorizing scriptures. Those scriptural verses that are especially empowering can be in the Bible, it can be in the Old Testament, it can be in the New Testament, it can be in our Bhagavad Gita, but to begin to memorize those and then try to live them. And Claudia, what happens then, that's really learning the scripture. And what's happening is that verse is changing our behavior from the inside out. We are also becoming the commentators of these verses. We're not going to somebody else. We are learning what these verses mean, our own awareness, and that brings us joy and a sense of fulfillment. So those are two helpful things, I think, to begin with.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so excited about this because I always believe that the purpose of life is to learn, to get better, right? It's life fulfillment or self-realization, it's also called. And when I started studying Buddhism and Vedanta, I was amazed by the amount of work that has been done regarding the mind.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the yogi mind and yoga psychology and the vrittis and samskaras. It's thousands of years ago, they were already studying the mind through meditation, like experiential, to know the true self and not the monkey mind. And that amazes me because that shows that without a calm mind, you cannot be self-realized or life fulfilled. You know, you cannot be happy. Yeah. Do you agree with that?
There are different levels of realization. And I think, and there are spiritual aspirants who are mystical and non-mystical. And the main thing is not craving spiritual experiences so much as craving knowledge of God, and let the experiences come. And those experiences, if they're genuine, they transform us and they help us in our development. And so it's an never-ending process of self-development, self-realization. But yes, it's reorienting ourselves to view ourselves in a different way. And when, through practice, we began to get an inkling of that divinity within, that changes how we perceive the world. Whatever we gain in our spiritual life, that changes how we see the world around us. The two go together.
Mm-hmm.
When a person has a level of realization, for example, when Sri Ramakrishna, in his realizations, he didn't come in the room and say, you're a sinner and you're a sinner and you're a sinner. No. What he saw were people who were like glass houses and this divine light shining within. He could see their chosen ideals, who they meditated on. And he would salute them, as divine beings.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an important connection between the inner and the outer transformation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so there are many, many different types of ways we connect with the divine. It can be a whole dream. It can be just a vision opening up. It can come in meditation, but often it doesn't come in meditation.
Mm-hmm.
It can come through prayer as well, where you hear an inner voice of the divine, something audible within the inner ear. And so there are many different kinds of experiences. And those who are of a non-mystical bent, their intuitive capacity increases so they can feel the vibration of the people around them. They can feel the presence of the divine. And so again, it's depending on the temperament of the aspirant, these experiences change for different people.
Yeah. The challenge that I see the most is in the mental health community, there is no mention of these whatsoever, like no spirituality, no mystical experiences, because anything that is not science-based, they don't want to bring it into the mental health field. Like they actually compare that with schizophrenia. Like schizophrenia is when people hear voices or have visions.
Yeah, there is a danger there. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yes. But one thing that's very valuable in the yoga tradition is when we are dealing with the mind,
Mm-hmm.
And there is an obsessive thought or a thought that keeps reappearing. We don't wrestle with it, you see. What we do is what I call spiritual Jiu-Jitsu. And that is, you can turn it around. For example, if you have a resentment, turn it around and consciously throw waves of loving consciousness towards the object of your resentment. The other thing is, if there is a nagging thought, to simply don't pay attention and don't indulge. It's a practice. For example, in getting over an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Not now. Not now. And re-engage in something else. What was so interesting is a friend of mine, who's a schizophrenic, came to me.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a close friend, but he was hearing voices. Lucy, who was telling him to cut himself. And I advised him to seek a psychiatrist from an Eastern tradition. And he did. And a year or two later, I met with this young man, and I asked him if he was still hearing the voice of Lucy. And he said no. And I said, why not? And he said, my psychiatrist told me to don't show interest and ignore her voice. And so it went away. And so these techniques in the Eastern tradition are very, very helpful in mental psychology, but there is a danger of people who are not sound, feeling that they are having a genuine experience when it is not. So there is a danger there, and we've seen that.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, we want our viewers to see that we know what we're talking about, right? This is not like confusing this with hearing voices and being schizophrenic. No, no, no. This is actually makes you a better person.
Then you know you've had a genuine experience, and that experience guides you.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, in our tradition, we don't talk about our experiences because when you do, you dissipate them. The only one you talk to about it is your guru, and who can advise you, can authenticize, let you know if it's an authentic experience or not. And with an experience, there's a transformation. It can be an experience that lasts for 3 days, an experience that lasts for 6 months, an experience that lasts for a lifetime, that's always there, and that you can relive in your meditation. But I'm very wary of people who are always wanting to share their experiences. And I have to tell them, don't do that. Keep it within. Keep it within.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's my understanding, that you should not share. Not everybody understands. You should only talk to your guru.
I wanted to say one other thing too, in relating spiritual experiences, that arouses jealousy in others, but it also arouses our imagination so that we begin to think that we're having an experience. There was one in particular who noticed that somebody was shaking in their meditation and thought it was a very spiritual sign. She began to shake. And finally, her teacher said, you cannot be allowed to perform any worship or meditation until you stop the shaking. And so the shaking stopped. Shaking of the body, any kind of tremulation, is not a positive sign. So you see, the mind is so prone to absorb and to imagine that then the false imagination takes over. And we begin to think that we are having an experience when actually we're not.
Yeah. Good explanation. It's good to keep an eye on those differentiations. All right. Thanks, Mataji. What else? I wanted to ask you to finish two things. First is how Vedanta has made you a better person. And then I will ask the last question.
You know, in spiritual life, you always feel that when the grace of God comes, that you're not worthy of something so wonderful. And so, better person, I hope I am. But I know this, that if I did not have Vedanta, my world would be gray. It would just take a gray tone. And I would say that what Vedanta has taught me is that you can never judge. You can never judge another. Holy Mother, Saraswati, who was the consort of Sri Ramakrishna, the virgin wife of Ramakrishna, said, if you want peace of mind, never find fault with others. Try to find your own fault. No one is a stranger. Learn to make the whole world your own. So that idea of non-duality, try to look on the world with equanimity. Understand the difference between right and wrong, yes, who you wish to associate with and who you don't wish to associate with, but try to see the divine in others. The other thing I would say is that spirituality, you cannot judge your spiritual life according to misfortunes that come your way, or challenges or obstacles. Instead, these obstacles and challenges come to everyone, so long as we're in this world. And if we use them in our spiritual practice, if we use them as our sadhana to go through them, then we grow the most. It's not when we're happy or content. It's when we're really struggling. And that's when we call on inner resources we never even knew we had. So
yeah. Wow, that's wonderful. Great explanation. Can you explain what is sadhana for our viewers?
sadhana is spiritual practice. And it is spiritual practice can be working as worship. That's our karma yoga. Working as an offering to God. It's serving others, mentally superimposing your chosen ideal on that person, knowing that the same self is within that person. It is prayer, it's meditation, it's self-inquiry. But sadhana is regularity of spiritual practice. For example, meditation is something that's done every day. It's not done this day of this week and maybe next month, that day, but it's something that's built into your life as part of your spiritual program. Holy reading, that's spiritual sadhana. All of this goes together.
Yeah, I call it like a personal development plan, a routine that you have to follow to be a better human being.
You can take yoga wherever you go. You can take it to work. You can, all your patients can be an offering to the divine. And whenever we undergo anything, we always pray that let thy will be done, let you speak through, and offer that at the end back to the divine, so we don't accept the fruits of our labor, but we let them go and offer them as worship.
Yeah, that's wonderful. The world would be so different if we worked for helping others instead of gaining something only for ourselves.
There have been some wonderful experiments done, happiness studies. There have been medical clinic studies done with yoga, and I don't be interested in those to share with you. But at the Anderson Medical Clinic, Dr. Chow, who's spoken at CU here, he's a Tibetan Buddhist tradition, but of course Buddhism is an outgrowth of Hinduism. And so many of the seed words, the mantras, are similar in both traditions. And so there were studies done with women cancer patients who had lost cognitive ability. And they underwent chanting sessions, and there was one study that did not. And those who underwent the chanting sessions, they improved their cognitive ability with these seed words. Another is happiness studies that have been done. This positive psychology has shown us that whenever we become absorbed in something, it can be in painting, it can be in music, it can be in dance, it can be in science, whatever, there is a flow that happens, which we call dharana. And when it's an unbroken flow, if it lasts for 6 seconds, there is what is called a joy of concentration, and that's what happens in meditation. But when it happens in work that we're engaged, there's a tremendous happiness that wells up inside of ourselves. And so I think that's a contribution that meditation can make and yoga can make to these happiness studies, is that try to yoke your mind to something you can do well, and try to do that every day, something you like, where you can lose your sense of self. Because when we become absorbed, and if we become so absorbed, sometimes we don't even hear our name when it's being called. And that's the self is becoming diminished. And so also is the time and space becoming diminished. And out of that, we get joy. That's one thing. And the other thing that can be very, very helpful is our meditation that bring in a sense of interconnectedness with others, and meditation on unity. Even an atheist can do that and feel a divine connection, and that uplifts the mind. And then, of course, the joy of karma yoga. A lot of us, when they came back from the war, went through psychology, all kinds of things, but when they saw in the Mission Continues, and that's the name of the program, these vets building houses for people or doing volunteer service, their rehabilitation increased 100-fold. This is basically karma yoga, selfless service. What happens is when we forget the self in doing to others, there is a joy that comes from that. We're honoring the self in others. We're loving our neighbor as ourself. And there is a connection of the two selves and that feeling of unity. And that brings a sustained feeling of happiness and rehabilitation. I would say your Hatha Yoga also. I would say Hatha Yoga, just the postures which connect us to the body and the mind help to make us more observant of what's going on in the mind. And we become our own doctors. We, just as in karma yoga, you become your own guru. You see your relationship you have with yourself by the way you treat your work. If you're throwing a broom aside when you're finished, you don't respect your work. And when we learn to work in a more concentrated fashion, mindfully, with reverence for our work, that changes us inside out as well. So I would say the Hatha is very important in helping us to develop that mind-body connection.
Yeah, for sure. That is so important. I have recommended to several people to see their work as more like a service, to get out of their heads. And some people are very reluctant to accept that, to understand it. They say, I'm not going to get better doing service for others. So it's very hard to sometimes help people understand the benefits of karma yoga, doing service for others, and getting out of your head, out of your poor me mentality, right?
Karma yoga, they say, is the hardest yoga. To really unite the mind in a way where you are witnessing your work and you're working mindfully and to the best of your ability, and then offering the fruits so that you're not karmically bound by what you do, is a very high yoga. Vivekananda said it was his work. And some of the greatest realized souls were those who did the simplest jobs. By doing this service with reverence every day, this interior life develops, and there's a strength that comes with that, and a power.
Yeah, like folding clothes, preparing meals, just thinking about whatever self-realized person you want to think of as a sadhana, spiritual practice.
When Vivekananda came to the West, sometimes his disciples would take him to a restaurant, but he would always go into the kitchen to look at the face of the cook, because the cook's vibrations are what are going into the food. And so cooking is one of the highest forms of yoga, because you're actually transforming the food by the vibrations you're putting into it as you're cooking. Usually mantra practice goes on. You are cooking for the Lord, that idea. And so it's a very high form of yoga.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Can you share with us the best lesson you have ever learned, or the best advice that someone has given you in your life?
Well, I remember I've had many teachings. Some I can't share. but there were one in particular that made a deep impress on me. I received it from my guru, Swami Prabhavananda, who was a disciple of Swami Brahmananda, a direct disciple of Ramakrishna. And he used to call us and ask us how our meditations were. And I was just a young nun, and I was so in awe. And the only question I could think to ask was, how should one work? And his answer was very simple, but I'll never forget it. He said, don't work for yourself. And the way he said yourself, it sounded so despicable and so low-minded. Always work for the Lord, work for the higher self. So that was something that just once, but the way he said the word self, your ego, it made the work sound so degraded when we work that way. And it had a very, very strong impression.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. That's all. I appreciate it. I hope our viewers enjoy this. Thanks, Mataji.
I hope so too. It's been lovely. Thank you.
I'm sure they will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.